and we messed it up. We set it up incorrectly. And he's standing there scratching his head for 20 minutes. He can't figure it out. Of course he can't figure it out. It was impossible because we set it up incorrectly. And when we apologized profusely, he didn't get angry at all. He's famed for having a nasty temper, but it didn't matter. Yes, I went into the Sullivan Street, Thompson Street, the chess store, and watched people play there. Again, in New York, pizza, right? You know what's opening up next week in New York City that every tourist should probably go to?
What's that?
Marie Blachère. Marie Blachère is a bakery that has 600 branches in France. So far, they only have 2 here, one in Long Island, and the other one that's opening up on Carmine Street in 6th Avenue. If you ever want to know what it's like to die and go to heaven, have one of their croissants. Have one of their baguettes. They're just completely out of this world. I have nothing to do with this company. I have no knowledge of it. I'm not a flack for the company or anything like that. I can only tell you that I can't say only in New York because France has 600 of them, but we didn't have them. Now we do.
Morning everybody. I'm Michael Clement, Deputy Commissioner, National Operations, New Zealand Police, based across the road here at Police National Headquarters. And I'm here this morning to speak about the legislation that we hope is going to come into place tomorrow or on Friday. On the 15th of March, our country was shocked by a horrific terrorist attack which took 50 lives away from families and loved ones in Canterbury. Changes have been passed by Parliament reforming the Arms Act and New Zealand's firearms laws. They are expected to come into effect on Friday. Police is responsible for implementing those changes, and I am the executive lead in respect of that work. We take this role very seriously, and we are committed to continuing to work in partnership with our firearms community across New Zealand to make this transition to the new laws as easy as possible for everybody. The most significant change is around prohibiting most semi-automatic firearms, their parts and large capacity magazines. We recognise that for some firearms owners, these are significant changes. We ask for people to be patient while we work through development of robust processes around large-scale collection of firearms, exemption processes and developing a buyback compensation scheme. We know we have a big job ahead of us, and we also know that we're up for the challenge. We have been having ongoing conversations with the New Zealand firearms community to understand what impact changes could have on them, and they have been frank with us. They've shown understanding and a commitment to work together with us as we face the new world. These are law-abiding members of our community. I realise there is a lot of information people want to know now. Some things I will be able to answer and other things we will be able to tell you as time progresses and as processes develop. As you can appreciate, the law changes are not yet in effect, and so therefore processes remain under development. Police will have new offences and penalties to enforce. However, I want to emphasise that the amnesty provisions in the legislation protect licence holders with good intent. Additionally, police staff across the country are being briefed so that they understand the intent of the change. And as we do every day, apply that law as intended. Let me be clear though, those people who threaten or actually harm others with firearms can expect police to act swiftly and in accordance with existing firearms legislation. I undertake to keep you updated as time progresses and as the law comes into effect and our processes in respect of that new legislation develop. The amnesty in place now will last for at least 6 months, so there is time for people to notify us of their intent to hand in a prohibited firearm and to get that process started for them. As you know, details of the buyback compensation scheme are still being developed. When they're finalised, we will announce those details in conjunction with government. For people who find themselves now in possession of prohibited firearms, we ask you to please notify us online through the police website as soon as possible. We have a wealth of information now on our website, including frequently asked questions. If you can't find the information that you are looking for, please call us on 0800 311 311, as many have been doing to this point. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
What is your plan for the safe storage of firearms as they're handed in?
Police already undertakes the surrender of firearms routinely across the country every day with regard to existing law, and so we'll be replicating those processes, acknowledging clearly that the volume will be far greater. So we're working through the process of dealing with that volume as we speak.
Do you have the capacity to take guns en masse into police stations?
Well, we didn't yesterday, but we're quickly developing processes to make sure that we can meet that expectation. And that's why I urge gun owners to register online, be patient, keep the firearms secured, so that by the time that New Zealand Police is ready to receive those firearms, we can do so safely. That's in the interests of the firearms users themselves and our staff.
And will you be taking them in big lots, or do you expect the 30th of September to come and you just get hundreds and hundreds of guns, or how is that going to work?
So I think there'll be a variety of options available, but I think what I would restate is the fact that people should be patient while we work out what the process is going to be. We will work out a process whereby people can keep their firearms secured as they currently do under their existing licence and with the protection of the amnesty, and we will work out processes to go and collect those firearms from them.
What are the rules around using those guns while the amnesty is in place and before it is required that they are handed over to police?
Well, when the law comes into effect, I think the intent of the legislation is very clear. These firearms are prohibited, so the intent follows that they should not be used.
What will happen to those who use them during the amnesty period?
I've already talked about the firearms community. They are law-abiding citizens. They have been anxious to work with us as this legislation change takes effect. I'm very confident that none of them wants to be a lawbreaker. But if they do find themselves unable to resist the urge, then we'll take each case as it comes. But I want to be very clear. From the date that this legislation receives royal assent, those firearms are prohibited, and so I would expect that they are not used.
How many guns are you expecting to get back?
The reality is we don't know. It's the great unknown question. Everybody appreciates that there is no register of firearms with regard to the majority of the firearms of this type that we are talking about. So it could be in the tens of thousands, it could be more.
So should police not be able to find that out though? I mean, you sign off every single import of a firearm that comes into New Zealand. Do you not have those records?
The reality is there is no register of the firearms fleet in New Zealand for Category A firearms. So while there are some firearm endorsements for which we do keep records, there is no requirement under the existing legislation to register firearms, and so therefore the answer to the question is I do not know the size of that fleet.
Do you keep those import forms, every single import form for people that bring firearms into the country?
Those records are kept, as I've talked about previously. That's a paper-based front-end process, and for the last 2 years New Zealand Police has been working on a process of modernisation with regard to the way in which we administer the Firearms Act. This enhances and makes that process even more important. So we were pushing on already, and this makes it more important that we are able to answer those questions.
So you will eventually know how many firearms there are in New Zealand?
I think it's going to be based on the intent of government. So most will have heard that the government is interested in advice with regard to a second tranche of legislation. So we're in the process of putting that advice together and providing it to government. So I think it's too premature to know whether or not that will include a full appreciation of the exact number of firearms in New Zealand.
Aren't you asking a lot of gun owners to surrender their firearms without any detail on the buyback scheme? Isn't that a large element of trust in?
So that's why our advice is to register the fact that licence holders possess these firearms and to wait while that process is matured. So we expect in the next few days, into next week, that the detail in respect of the compensation scheme will become clear. And once that's happened, we will build that into our processes, because we're not even clear ourselves of the exact detail of that. But the reality is we are preparing on the basis of a compensation scheme. So there have been people who have handed in firearms already, and we're fine with that too. But if people are concerned about not having the details of the compensation scheme and therefore confidence in it, then we advise them to register and hold their firearms in secure storage until we can make arrangements to uplift them.
How do we convince people with illegal firearms to bring their firearms into police?
Well, we're going to go through an engagement process with all New Zealanders, not just the licensed firearms holders. So I talked about those people being law-abiding citizens. We all know that there are firearms in the hands of people who should just not have them and who use them unlawfully. That's true today, and it's going to be true tomorrow when the new legislation comes into place. So we will police accordingly. We will engage with the likes of communities. We will visit communities. We'll talk to them about the merits of handing in firearms. But at the end of the day, they listen to that message and they either take it on board or they don't.
Do you think you'd have a better opportunity of getting illegal firearms back if you paid compensation for those as well, if there was some sort of incentive?
I think that's a matter for the policy development, and as we know in the legislation, that's not included. So there isn't a compensation arrangement for illegal firearms. And I think there are arguments for and against, and for the time being, the argument in terms of legislation is against paying for illegal firearms. And I'm confident many people understand the merits of that.
So what's police's position on that? Because, I mean, surely you want guns out of the community.
Absolutely. We, dozens of times a week we encounter firearms in our operating environment, and it's a concern for all of our staff who are in that position and for those members of the community who are put at harm as a consequence of those illegal firearms. So we are open to any approach from anybody in any part of our community with regard to those who want to surrender firearms, legal or illegal. And we will be engaging across New Zealand with a view to achieving just that. But I think we all have to be real about this. In fact, some have stated there are going to be those out in their community who have no intention of surrendering illegal firearms.
Have you been talking to gangs about, have police reached out to gangs about maybe not prosecuting if they did hand in either illegal firearms or ones that were illegally obtained?
We haven't started the engagement process other than conceptually yet. So we've had a process in terms of our administration responsibilities under the existing legislation to engage with members of the firearms licence community and dealers and the like. But it's very much in our plans to get across New Zealand and engage with all sectors of our community, including gangs. So if they are ready for a conversation, we are ready to have one with them.
What sort of rates of compliance are you expecting in terms of the buyback scheme?
Well, I expect 100% compliance, frankly, with regard to, as I keep saying, and I keep getting told by the firearms community, these are law-abiding, fit and proper people. Through no fault of their own, the legislation has changed, and they want to continue to be law-abiding citizens. So I think we all should expect 100% compliance with that, because if they don't, they are no longer law-abiding citizens.
But is that realistic, though?
Well, if we're to trust in the process and the relationship, then I think it is. It has to be.
Australia didn't have 100% compliance. Has anywhere had 100%
Well,
compliance?
Yeah, I'm not going to stand in front of you and say 80% is good enough. I'm sure that you'd agree with that. The reality is we are going to push hard to make sure we reach every gun licence holder and to make it really clear to them about what the expectation is under this new legislation, that they would be breaking the law after the period of the amnesty if they hold on to firearms that are prohibited. I don't think I've heard anyone suggest that they want to be in that
What happens
category.
to people who might not understand that they have a firearm that's now prohibited? It might not be an explicit military weapon, you know? Will they be prosecuted after the 6-month mark?
I think this is going to be, I suppose, borne out by the extent of the effectiveness of our engagement. So if there's a licence holder out there that we can reach, and we aim to reach all 250,000 odd of them over a period of time, we're going to make it really clear about what the rules are, and you're about to have a presentation. In fact, you have a part to play with regard to conveying this message, and in fact it's my intent that we would take this message across the country. So I accept, you know, if you're not reading the main network news or your local newspaper, as some are prone not to, or going online to check these things out, then you might be in a position whereby you're not well informed with regard to what's legal and what's not legal anymore.
But will you pursue prosecutions in all cases?
We apply discretion each and every day of our lives across New Zealand, and if someone with good intent comes forward and isn't using those firearms in a way that's intended to harm or worse members of New Zealand community, then we will apply that discretion as we do every day.
Do you have an update on how many firearms have been surrendered so far?
It's a couple of hundred, I think, but I don't have the exact number on my head.
Council of Licensed Firearms Owners has suggested the relatively low number that's been handed in so far might be indicative that people aren't really going to be willing to give up their firearm.
Well, I take issue with that. The reality is what we've been saying through our messaging is just hold and be patient while we work through this process. I'm sure everybody appreciates the law of a few weeks ago is not going to be the law of tomorrow. So in a very short space of time, there's been quite a shift in the Arms Act in terms of what's allowable and what's not. So we've been saying through our messaging, please register online, keep your firearms safe, because that's what you do as law-abiding citizens and gun licence holders. And when we have the processes sorted out, then we will collect them. So if people in the community are saying different, then I just encourage them to be part of the solution with regard to what we're trying to achieve here, is to make all New Zealanders safe.
Are you putting too much are you putting too much faith into the gun-owning community when we had people rushing out and panic buying these things when the government indicated it was going to ban them?
Well, there are exceptions to every rule. So we have a fit and proper standard when it applies to gun licence holders, and I've stood in front of many of them, and they've all assured me that they are fit and proper people under the Act, and they are law-abiding citizens in New Zealand. If people want to break the law, as they can do from time to time, then we all know how that ends.
What will the police be doing to ensure that nobody's selling these weapons now or importing them or anything like that?
So that's part of the messaging to every gun licence holder, every dealer. There are many layers and communities of interest when it comes to the legitimate importation and supply, sale of firearms, and exchange of firearms and use of firearms. So we've got a very clear appreciation of where those communities are, and we have got a very clear appreciation of how to reach them. So we are setting up networks and already have networks in place with regard to how to engage with them. Is it good enough? Has it been good enough? Some will say no. And quite frankly, I can stand in front of you and say no. But the reality is we have to be exemplary with regard to this if we're to achieve what we are expected to achieve. This is all about making New Zealanders safer and free of semi-automatic firearms.
Are police still processing firearm licence applications at the moment?
Yes, police do process firearms licence applications every day of the year, and we will continue to do that in respect of the non-prohibited firearms.
Has there been any sort of internal change in fit and proper or your assessment of licence applications?
There hasn't been to date. I think there's a willingness to have a conversation about that, but the reality is the policy work isn't developed yet. So part of our advice will be to check in on all aspects of the existing legislation and make sure it's fit for purpose. So
Have any E-category firearms licence been granted since the firearms ban?
Not to my knowledge.
What will happen with surrendered firearms? Will they be destroyed?
ultimately, yes.
Do you have the resources to do it, or you need more?
Well, we're talking to people that might better help us with regard to that.
Defence Force, for example?
Pardon me?
The Defence Force?
Yes, absolutely. So we have Defence already embedded with us and our team across the road here with regard to what the options might be in relation to collection and destruction of firearms. And we're taking advice from our friends across the Tasman who have been through this, clearly, as you've already alluded to. So lots of options open to us, and we'll pursue the most logical.
How are you going to inform the pricing of the buyback? How does that work?
So the government's still working through its policy with regard to that. I think at its core it'll be about, fundamentally I believe anyway, the make and model and the age and condition of the firearm, and there'll be a process in place to make sure that people's expectations and fair compensation line up. If that's the finish of the questions, I know that you're probably more interested in the actual firearms, but I'll take one or two final questions.
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the submitters to the subcommittee said the New South Wales experience, they collected far more firearms once they put trucks out into the community. Is that something that you'll be doing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're mindful of this vision that I have in my head that you know, we might have queues outside police stations with people holding firearms, and I don't think that probably works for many people. So we've got to find the balance between encouraging people to comply with the intent, because they want to, right? I mean, New Zealanders want to be lawful gun licence holders, and they want to surrender their firearms because they now know they're unlawful. So, but we just got to be sensible and careful about it. Queues of people outside police stations probably doesn't work for me and work for many others. So I think you'll find in the round whole lots of choices for people with regard to how to surrender their firearms safely.
Would you prefer that police went and picked them up rather than anyone coming near a police station?
Yeah, police and our partners, I think that that's more sensible that we do so by appointment, knowing what we're walking into, knowing that they're going to have someone that they're comfortable surrendering their firearms to, and that there's a robust process to itemise those firearms so that in the end of the day they get fairly compensated, which is your questions about the compensation scheme.
Are you concerned about the safety of officers going to collect firearms?
I'm always concerned about the safety of police officers when it comes to firearms. As I said, each and every day, dozens of times a week, our police officers encounter situations that are dangerous with firearms. But we want to put in place a process in respect of this compensation, the buyback scheme and the amnesty that is safe. So we're giving it a lot of thought, and clearly I believe in the intent of gun licence holders that when we make an arrangement to safely uplift firearms, that's exactly what it will be, a safe uplifting of those firearms.
Will you arm the officers that go out and collect them?
Those decisions haven't been made yet. It'll be determined by factors that you know that exist at the time when we start to collect. I don't think that's what New Zealanders expect, is to see armed police officers arriving to uplift firearms, but as I say, it's a bit premature for me to start determining what that will be.
Do police have enough powers to go after these firearms? Would firearms prohibition orders be useful, for example?
I think that's the conversation we're going to be having with government in terms of the advice that they've asked us to put together now in relation to a second tranche of legislation. So I don't think anything's off the table. I don't specifically have advice getting prepared around firearms prohibition orders, but it's been a conversation that's been ongoing for a number of years. It works in some jurisdictions, and there's every reason why I'm sure the government wants to consider it, at least here in New Zealand.
Would you like more search and surveillance powers?
Police has good search and surveillance powers now, so it's not about a grab for search and surveillance powers. It's actually about making New Zealanders safe. And so the legislation, we believe, in terms of what we're going to have come into being tomorrow, is about making New Zealanders safe. So we have the ability, where we have concerns, to use existing legal frameworks to go after people who've shown an intent to harm New Zealanders with firearms.
People aren't forthcoming. Will you exercise those rights? Will you be knocking down doors to get guns?
We don't knock down doors, to be honest with you, not very often anyway. On the odd occasion perhaps, but the reality is a knock on the door usually suffices. The reality is we do this now. We do it every day across New Zealand, is that of course in the interests of keeping people safe, it's our job to make sure those that want to create harm or hold firearms illegally do so at their peril, and they can expect a knock on the door from police rather than the door being knocked down. Is that enough questions? Shall we go into the presentation? I'm sure this is going to be far more interesting than I. So can I introduce Inspector Mike McElwraith and Senior Sergeant Paddy Hannon? I think they already feature in your footage, and they're going to take you through.
Cheryl gave me a kiss. He suggested I give you the video recorder. He was obviously thinking you'd be able to enjoy the movie anytime you felt like it. I keep telling you, darling, Daddy's really a very kind man.